It includes a lot of elements, things like knowing the media landscape around you, building relationships, crafting your pitch, and also knowing how to take advantage of good coverage or how to respond to negative or unflattering coverage. So let's see. I don't know if there's just a lag or if I can't advance the slide.
Normal? Huh. Okay. Let me see. Oh, there it goes.
Okay. Yeah, it's just gonna be a little shaky for a while, but we'll get it figured out.
Sure.
As mentioned, my name is Terry Streetman. I am a development specialist for the Alzheimer's Association Nebraska chapter. I manage several of our fundraising events to support our mission, which is to eliminate Alzheimer's disease through the advancement of research, to provide and enhance care and support for all affected, and to reduce the risk of dementia through the promotion of brain health. Before I moved out here to Nebraska and took this position with the Alzheimer's Association, I actually worked for Michigan Nonprofit Association as a communications and public policy manager. So I'm very familiar with my colleagues over at MNA and the work of the VISTA program. So I really appreciate all the work that all of you do to help, improve communities throughout Michigan. I'm also a proud graduate of Bowling Green State University. And in addition to my time at MNA and the Alzheimer's Association, I've got several years of experience working on marketing and communications efforts, both in the nonprofit and for-profit sectors. And you may notice I included a shameless plug there, and I'm happy to be shameless about nonprofit causes, the Alzheimer's Association. If I've learned anything from working on this cause for years, it's that there's always somebody who needs some help. So if that applies to you, hopefully you can catch that information, and I'll have it at the end as well. So when we talk about communication strategies and pitching your story, one of the first things that you need to do is sort of analyze the landscape around you. You have to understand what your options are, what your media landscape looks like. And so that means taking stock of the communications channels that are available to you and deciding what's the best fit for your organization or your story. So if you think about it, you probably already know a lot of the existing outlets. You can think of television stations or newspapers or radio stations, what have you. But there's probably several outlets that you're not aware of or you don't think of on a day-to-day basis. So before you get started with trying to promote a story or a cause in the media, you want to do some deeper dives and do some internet searches, ask around to friends and relatives in the area, try to get a really complete picture. And once you've done that, you want to try to organize those outlets into categories based on things like the format, if it's radio, TV, print, or online, but also by audience. So maybe by age or interest or genre, if it's a radio station. Do that as much as you can, because that's going to help you decide what channel or what channels are the best fit for your story or your pitch. So for an example, we'll take a look at the Lansing, Michigan area. I just did not even a very deep dive. I just did a couple searches to try to put this together, just to give you an idea. You may, when you think of the media in your area, you may think of the big four networks and a couple radio stations and maybe this State Journal and City Pulse. But if you really think about it and you really dig deep, there are a lot of other channels that you could take advantage of that might reach an audience that's important for you. So for instance, when I worked with the Alzheimer's Association in Michigan for our Walk to End Alzheimer's, Home TV is a channel that was a huge help. They're a community channel. It's Hazlitt, Okemos, Meridian, I think, government access public channel. And while they don't have the viewership of, the big four networks, they were really willing to help us out and promote our event because, it's a community event and that's what they're there for. So they would invite us onto their live call-in show. They would put us on their coffee corner show, all these sort of things that even if they didn't have a lot of viewership initially, it gave us something to share to our audiences and really help get the word out. So, don't ignore those local stations, the WKARs and the community newspapers. A lot of them have specially designed options for you to get a community message out that would be helpful for your program or your cause. So once you've figured out what all the outlets and channels are around you, the next step is to consider the contacts within those channels. You want to, develop that list, take a look at the different outlets. Most of them will have a page on their website that lists their staff, including their on-air staff, their administrative staff, their editorial staff, depending on what type of outlet it is and how big it is. Some of them only have a couple staff members. Some of them, like the bigger networks, have a whole crew of people doing on-air and production and administration. What you'll find when you do this kind of digging and deep dive is that most of these outlets have a contact email address or phone number for story ideas or general comments. And you can reach out to those. I mean, that's what they're there for. The thing you'll find, though, is that those email addresses are pretty much swamped with a ton of story ideas and suggestions, a lot of which probably aren't particularly interesting or helpful. So it's a lot of work for the staff to sort through those, and you could sort of get lost in the noise with your pitch. So if you can find within that list of contacts or through some other research or reaching out to the station a specific reporter or editor, especially if they've got a particular type of story or a particular beat as their assignment, if they're on a philanthropic beat or something like that, you'll have a lot better success with getting your story picked up as opposed to trying to wade through the noise of the general story submission email address. So again, here's just an example. This is WILX 10. They're in the Lansing area. This is their Contact Us page. And what you'll see is they've got their on-air talent listed there. If you were to scroll down, you'd see, their newsroom staff, their administrative staff, their sales team, their DC office, all that kind of stuff. And you'll see too, I highlighted the story ideas email address. So again, there's nothing wrong with sending an idea to that story ideas address, but you just want to be aware that chances are that thing is flooded with a lot of suggestions. So it's better to reach out to someone specific. So once you've sort of figured out the landscape, you want to start putting together your pitch. When you're getting ready to do that, you really want to start with identifying your goals. If you don't know what you want to get out of a story or a pitch or whatever, you're probably not going to get much out of it. So, is it something like you've got an event that you're promoting and you want to get more attendees for it? Or are you just trying to raise awareness about a particular social issue? Do you want to connect with potential donors to get more resources for a project or a program? Knowing this going in will help you make a more effective pitch so that you get out of it what you want. So once you've got your goal in mind, you want to develop that pitch. And it's really important to look for a hook, or what's known as the so what element. And this is kind of self-explanatory, but this is something that makes your story compelling and makes it stand out. Like I said, there's a ton of story ideas coming in every day. There's a lot going on in the different communities that these outlets cover. So what is it about your story that makes it stand out and makes it worthy of the very limited column space and airtime that's out there? Why should the reporter or editor take your story and put it in their in their broadcast or their publication? A really good way to sort of figure out the so what and highlight and make your pitch stand out is to boil it down to a concise list of talking points. This is going to be the who, what, where, when, and why of your story. You want to be able to pitch it quickly and in a concise manner. Reporters and editors, they have a ton of demands on their time. They're always working under deadline. So you need to be able to get their attention efficiently and communicate what's important about your story very quickly. And having that so what really distilled down to something that's got a really good punch, that's what's going to help get their attention and make sure that your story gets out there. One thing, as a part of this, developing your pitch, figure out who the people are that you want to highlight. This could be senior staff from a program or an organization, or participants or recipients of a service. Crafting your pitch around them, that's going to make your story more interesting to the outlet for them to pick it up and to its audience, because it's got to focus on people. So for me, in my job, an example of a so what would be this. If I'm working on our Rivals flag football fundraiser event, if I went to a news outlet and I said, our Rivals fundraiser is coming up on April 27th, you should come out and check it out, that's not going to be particularly compelling. They've got tons of events that they're being pitched. There's always something going on in the community. That's not compelling. What I would pitch instead would be, Ashley Jones lost her grandfather to Alzheimer's disease when she was only 18 years old. Now she participates in Rivals in memory of all the times that she spent watching Nebraska Cornhusker games with her grandfather and to support the thousands of other Nebraska families living with an Alzheimer's diagnosis. So it's not as short as the date and time of the event, but it's got a lot more punch. It focuses on a person and the impact on them of this disease. It ties back to Nebraska Cornhusker football, which is a huge deal here, just like Michigan State football in Lansing or what have you. And it communicates something about why we're doing what we're doing. So, making sure that you're really delivering a powerful punch with your pitch, that's going to make a difference in terms of getting the attention of the outlet and making sure that your story gets picked up. So what makes a good pitch? What makes a bad pitch? There's a famous saying in the political world that all politics is local. And I think that's something that also, in my opinion, applies to news as well. I have a lot of friends who work in the news media as reporters or editors, and they're always trying to localize national and international stories. Whenever there's a natural disaster abroad or some major event that's going on, if they can find a local individual who's affected or involved in some way, that's their hook. That's what makes them want to put that in their publication, because they're covering a local community. They want to speak to that local audience. So your pitch should do the same. So focus on local and community impact, what your program or your event or your service is doing for the local community, and specifically the people who are involved in it or who are benefiting from it. If you're highlighting specific individuals too, one thing that's important for you to remember, they have to be willing to be contacted and have a photo and their name published along with the story, which I know can be kind of tricky if you're working with at-risk populations and things like that. So, just make sure to keep that in mind as you're developing your pitch. Having that photo and that name is important for the reporter and can potentially be a deal breaker if somebody, isn't comfortable with that or isn't interested in that. One other thing for a good pitch too is a time hook. This is a story that's pegged to a certain date or an upcoming event. So for instance, when I was at MNA, we were working on nonprofit legislation dealing with property taxes. Nonprofits were being hit with these huge property tax bills, and it was a real struggle for them. When we were just working on a bill, if we went to a reporter and said, hey, we've got this bill, we'd love you to write about it, they would say, that's great, but where's the urgency? Why, why should I care? Once we had a hearing scheduled, we could go to them and say, October 10th, this bill will be heard in a committee hearing. So, you should write about it. And then they would be much more willing to pick it up because there was urgency. There was a time component to it. On the other side of the coin, it's kind of just the opposite of these things. What not to pitch. Don't pitch things that have no urgency, have no time hook. Don't pitch things that don't have a specific focus on the community or an individual. Also, try to avoid bureaucratic stories. Again, these outlets, they cover local communities and they want to connect with, the majority, the average reader or viewer or listener. So if you're pitching them a story that's really in depth with jargon and bureaucratic terms about very, specific programs and, whatever it may be, that's not going to appeal to their audience. They're not going to want to put that out there. So try to keep it, engaging to the average person. So knowing when to pitch can sometimes be just as important as what to pitch and crafting your pitch. As I mentioned before, reporters and editors, they're very busy. They've got really intense schedules. They're always under a deadline. They're running around all over the place. We used to get just frantic calls from reporters and editors saying, I need a response, within the next hour. So their schedules are hectic. So you need to understand you know, what their schedule is like and when to pitch to make sure that your story is going to get picked up. And this can really depend on the type of publication or the outlet. So when I worked for MNA, I edited our Links magazine, and that was published every quarter. So for each edition, we would start putting together our story budget like 3 or 4 months in advance. So if somebody wanted a piece, say, you know, somebody wanted to pitch a piece about a particular insurance issue for nonprofits or whatever it was, we would have people who would come to us and want to reach our audience. If they wanted that to run, say, in a June edition of our magazine, they would need to come to me in February or March to make sure that they got on the story budget for that issue, because we, you know, start that far in advance. We set our schedule, we start doing our interviews or outreach, and then, you know, the production process takes a long time. So the same kind of thing with a monthly or a weekly publication. For monthly, you know, a few weeks or a couple of months ahead of time, and again, a couple weeks for a weekly publication. But if it's a holiday publication, if it's a special edition like that, say it's the Christmas issue or whatever it might be, you're going to want to have even more lead time, maybe even double, because there's a lot of planning involved in that. So if you want to get a story out there, they're great times to get stories in. People read those things, they love them, they eat them up, but you really need to plan ahead on that kind of thing. Another technique that is sort of gaining in popularity is connecting your story to other current events, colloquially known as newsjacking or hijacking the news. You'll see this a lot connected to like major cultural events, things like the Super Bowl or the Oscars. One example, when the Super Bowl a couple years ago, when the power went out in the middle of the game, I think it was like Oreo put out something on social media. Their social media team was ready and waiting for, you know, a moment, and they seized it, and it was a huge deal. Tons of people noticed it. They got all kinds of press. The Alzheimer's Association, we've done that too. Still Alice won a bunch of Oscars in 2015. And so we were able to take advantage of that and, you know, make some social media posts and get some articles out there and pitch some stories to sort of ride that wave. There was very few times that Alzheimer's disease had been more on top of the cultural consciousness than when, you know, this Oscar-winning movie that dealt with the subject. So that's a great way to sort of ride the wave of attention and get your story out there, and like we did, promote our services and programs for people who were interested, who maybe wouldn't have known about us otherwise. So let's say you've done all the steps so far. You've examined the environment, you've found your contact, you've got your perfect pitch worked out, you've distilled it down to its perfect essential elements. You have plenty of time before you need it to run. How do you actually pitch a story? It can seem really intimidating. You know, how do you get the attention of these busy reporters and editors, and how do you even go about it? Well, there are a lot of different ways to do it, depending on what you need and what kind of time you have and things like that. So first off is the press release. It's you know, a lot of you are probably familiar with press releases. Maybe, you know, some of you have even written them. For those of you who haven't or aren't as familiar, press release is just a short document that lays out the important details of your pitch for the media outlet. So this should include all the basics, like we talked about earlier, the who, what, when, where, and why. But also, you know, you want to have your contact information in there. Generally, you want to include maybe a quote or two from people who are important to the story. So that could be a senior staff member, an executive director, or ideally someone who benefited from, you know, your program or service. You should also include in a press release a short selection of like boilerplate language about your program or organization. And you want to keep these pretty short. So generally, I try to keep them, you know, a page, no more than 1 page. Just again, busy editors, busy reporters don't want to dig through a 3-page press release to find the important elements and figure out what you're pitching. They want to be able to look at it and understand the pitch and decide whether it should run. Sometimes they'll run just what you put in the press release. They'll just put together a short story based on that. Sometimes they'll reach out, they'll contact you and flesh out a longer or more detailed story. Some other ways that you can get your story out there, though, you know, you can submit a letter to the editor. I've developed kind of a reputation for getting a lot of letters to the editor published, not so much in like an old man yells at cloud kind of way, but just trying to get, you know, important information out there that may or may not be getting picked up as a story. A letter to the editor can be a great way to do this. You know, news outlets love publishing these. There are a lot of restrictions on them, so oftentimes it's like 150 words or less. So that's where it really pays to be concise. That's where my poetry degree really pays off. I know how to say a lot in a few words. You can also, though, in addition to letters to the editor, a lot of publications also have guest columns. These are slightly longer, usually like 250 to 500 words. Along with letters to the editor, these may not always get published. You could write one out, submit it, and then nothing could ever happen. You could send one in and it gets published a month later. I've had, you know, any of those things happen, but it is another good way in, other than just a straight up, you know, press release. All the same things, of course, apply. You want to keep your letter short, get to the point, include the important details. Just, you know, you want to make sure that you're giving a good pitch, even if it's just a letter. Some of the other ways, though, that are maybe easier ways to get the word out and get your pitch into a publication, local media channels often will have community calendars, and some of you may have, you know, submitted things to these or seen events on them. But a lot of them allow you to just submit information on your own to them, and most of the time it's just a day or two turnaround for them to approve it. But you submit an upcoming event, you put a photo, a description, important details like time, date, location, price, link to the website. And oftentimes this can actually lead to a story. It seems like, you know, kind of a low effort, low impact way of putting a story out there, but I've had plenty of people show up to events because I listed them on there. And I've also had editors reach out and say, hey, we saw you submit this Walk to End Alzheimer's to our calendar. Can you tell me more about it? We might, you know, be interested in running a story. So that's another way, sort of a backdoor way to get your story into a publication that's not a press release. Another thing you can do too, social media was mentioned earlier. You can publish your own blog posts and share them across social media. I know that MNA Vista program has a blog. I used to help share those through our newsletters. Those are great ways to sort of put the effort in on your end and start building buzz for your event or your program. Social media can be a great tool. You want to make sure that you are being engaging, that you're being genuine in social media. And you want to, work on building your audience and building your message there. It's sort of the same way that you do for any of this other stuff. You want to make sure that you're communicating the impact. You're focusing on people. You're focusing on the community. You're not just pitching out dates and times and jargon. You want to make sure it's a really engaging message, especially on social media where, being genuine, having a genuine message is more important than anywhere else because that's what people are looking for. With any of these things too, with the social media or your own e-newsletter, a lot of times we would include media contacts on our e-newsletter list so that they, could have an idea of what was going on with us. They might not always read it, they might not ever read it, but if they read it every now and then and catch on to what we're working on, that can help, get the message out there. So speaking of those media contacts and reaching out to them, media relations is huge. This is something that Joan Bowman taught me about when I was at MNA. Developing your relationships with the media outlets and figures in your community is really important. You don't want to just be coming to somebody cold and saying, hi, I'm a complete stranger. How about you write a story about what I've got to say? You're going to fare a lot better if you have an existing relationship. If you have reached out to the media contacts, they're aware of you, they know of you as a resource, that can help, make it more likely for them to pick up your story. One thing that we had, when I worked with the Alzheimer's Association there in Michigan on our Rivals flag football game, we actually recruited a local TV personality to be our MC for the event. We built that relationship and we had her be our MC, that led to a ton of coverage because her outlet wanted to make sure they highlighted someone from their station, being a part of a community event and a good cause. That's something that happens if you build relationships and you have contacts. So introduce yourself to media contacts, like I said, before you need them. You can do media briefings. These might be hard to schedule. Again, busy schedules, and they don't know who you are. But if you are able to present yourself, not just that you want something from them, but you could be a resource to them, they could go for it. So at MNA, we would do that. We would say, hey, we'd love to meet with you, talk to you a little bit about the nonprofit sector. If you have any stories about this, about nonprofits in Michigan, we're happy to talk with you about them and be a resource. And we would get calls all the time on stories that had nothing to do with MNA, but were about nonprofits in the state. And then, when we had a story that we wanted to pitch, we had that relationship with a reporter or an editor who really trusted us and knew that we had good things to say and contribute. And then some other things too, you want to understand sort of the rules of the game when it comes to media. On the record and off the record are terms that get thrown around a lot. And, if you're not comfortable with the process, you may not know, you may think those are extremely hard and fast rules, or think that, things are only on the record if you say they are. Unless you're a pro at this, unless you have a long-standing relationship with the reporter and you trust them, and maybe even not them, just don't assume that anything is off the record. Your best bet is to, really work out your talking points, stay on message, redirect back to the message if other things come up, and don't say anything that you would regret having published, even if you don't think it's going to be part of the story. I don't say that to scare you exactly, maybe a little bit, but just, if you just stay on message and you'll be fine. Also, one thing that, is kind of a rookie mistake is asking to approve a story before it's published. That's something that you should not do. It will look like a lack of trust in the reporter, and it can make them, kind of sour on you. So there are ways to deal with negative things or mistakes if they come up, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But don't ask to review a story. And the final thing too is to be responsive. If you've provided your contact information or somebody else's, make sure that whoever's contact information is in the press release or the pitch is available to be reached for more information. If the outlet has questions or they want to put together a more in-depth story and they call and they get, a full voicemail box, they're probably just going to say, forget it. So make sure that, whoever is your contact person, whoever is your point person for a story, they need to be available. So you've done everything right. You got the perfect pitch to the perfect person at the perfect time, and your pitch gets published. Now what do? Well, first of all, you celebrate. You get real excited every time that we had stories, big stories published about M&A. When I was there, we got very excited. But there are some other important things for you to do to make sure that you get the most out of this opportunity and you can generate future opportunities for stories. So, your pitch gets published, you see it in the publication. Share that everywhere that you can. Put it on your social media, on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, everywhere that you can. Put it in your newsletters, put it on your website. This serves multiple purposes. For starters, it gets the word out to your constituents and your supporters and your stakeholders about the good things that you're doing. It makes you look good. But it also drives a lot of traffic to the website of the outlet that ran your story. This is going to help you in the future because they know that this is something people care about. This is something people want to read or watch or listen to. And then when future opportunities come up, they'll know that this is a story that matters to their audience. Thank them. So, like I said, we had a reporter as our MC for our event, and then we had a lot of coverage. Write a thank you. It could be an email, it could be a phone call, or you could write a handwritten note. Let them know that their story, made a difference and was important. That can really help. And, reporters, like anybody else, they like to feel like they've done something people appreciate and that makes a difference. And then one last thing is promoting opportunities for follow-up stories. Let's say your story that you pitched was about a career fair. helping people, find employment and, improve their economic situation, you could pitch a follow-up story, say, in a few months, we could visit with somebody who found a job through this job fair and talk about how it improved their life and things like that. Publications love those. People always want to, see follow-up, where are they now kind of things. And again, it gives another opportunity to get your program and your services in the media. Dealing with negative press, that's another thing, we talked about earlier. Every now and then, we would do a pitch, we'd do an interview, we'd do this whole thing, and then a story would come out and we would just kind of go, oh, that doesn't look great. That's not what we wanted out there. And it's easy right after the fact, when you see this kind of coverage, to say, oh no, we're ruined, this is terrible, people are going to be mad, and to, throw out a hasty, contradiction of the story. Don't do that. It's important. Take a minute, consider the story, what the actual impact was. Is this something that's actually going to be a problem, or does it just feel bad right now because you worked so hard on the pitch? What you want to do, generate, a list of responses to questions that might come up from other media or from key supporters or stakeholders. Make sure that the people who, are important and might be contacted about this, have all of those prepared answers. The last thing you want is a staff person or a volunteer picking up the phone and making a statement that makes things worse. So be prepared, be ready to answer questions. You can reach out to the particular reporter if something was factually incorrect. You can gently offer corrections or clarifications, but make sure, reach out to that person directly first. Don't immediately go to an editor or a manager. You should try to fix the issue at the lowest level first, and then if they're unwilling or unable to make a correction, that's when you want to move on and see potentially if you can escalate it up through your organization or theirs. And then if there is something factually incorrect and they can do a correction, ask if they can do an immediate correction online, and then, issue a correction later in print or on air, if it's something that's factually incorrect. If it just is something that you think sounds negative or sounds bad, there may not be a lot you can do about that, and there may not be a lot that you should do about that, if you really think about that. I do want to talk a little bit more about social media too before we get to the questions, because I know that was mentioned earlier, and I know this focused a lot on traditional media. I was part of a panel in Detroit for the social media day a few years back, and I just can't stress enough how much of the advice that was given was about being genuine and being sort of human. It can be difficult if you don't have a lot of time to manage social media. You can just, I'm guilty of this. I would just queue up, a tweet a day about a different, with a link to one of our resources. But the things that really connect with people are really the same across all types of media. Things that are genuine and earnest and are about people and are about, impact in the community. Those are the things that really get people's attention. So on social media, things with pictures of people that talk about impact and how people's lives have been changed or improved, that's going to get you a lot more response. And engagement is really critical on social media. If you've got people who are, you're sharing stories and people are commenting, responding to them and putting a human face on your program, both from the recipient side and from your side, social media campaigns and social media outlets from companies that have a person's name attached to them if they sign, this is from Jamie or whatever, those tend to feel more honest to people and more, they're more likely to engage with them than ones that just feel like a cold corporate mouthpiece just spouting off tweets here and there. So I understand, I'm not sure if that's enough about social media. If people have other questions about managing social media, I'd be happy to answer those. Any other questions that people have, I'd be happy to answer. I don't know if we can open it up to the crowd as far as questions. I do also, before I forget, I want to shout out this presentation was adapted from one that was given a while back by Robin Miner-Swartz, who is a great communications professional there in the Lansing area. you know, when I was asked to do this, I leaned kind of heavily on this presentation that she had done. So, you know, credit where credit's due. She's a total pro, and if you have any questions, obviously, you know, that's somebody to look for in the area. So anyway, yeah, questions if anybody has them. Do we have any questions?
On our end, we do not have any questions.
Okay. All right, well, so my contact information is here, and again, the Alzheimer's Association contact information is there, just in case anybody needs that. Like I said, if I've learned anything from doing this for 10 years, working as a volunteer or as an employee, every time I talk about it, there's somebody who's been affected and doesn't know where to find help. So on that front, please reach out to the organization if you need assistance. And then my email address is there. If people do have questions, I'll be happy to answer them to the best of my ability, or you know, possibly direct you to somebody who's much more knowledgeable than me, because you know, I've gotten a long way in life by surrounding myself with smart people, and I can say that at MNA I was surrounded by more smart people than at a lot of other times in my life. So yeah, thank you all so much for everything that you do. Your service is really important, and you know, we really appreciate everything that you do.
Terry, thank you so much for speaking with our cohort today. I really appreciate you logging on all the way from Nebraska.
Well, hopefully it was helpful, and you know, happy to connect back up with my Michigan folks. I miss Michigan and MNA a lot, but I'm glad to see that you're still doing great work out there.
We miss you, Terry.
Thank you, Terry.
Oh,
this is Mary. Just want to send a thanks of appreciation to you.
Yes, of course. I'm happy to help. Thanks so much.
No problem. Well, like Terry said, if you ever have any questions, he has his email, and we'll be sending out the PowerPoint at the end of the webinar, so you'll have his email that way as well if you missed it or if you didn't write it down yet. So anyways, all right, Terry, we're going to mute you now.
Okay.
All right. Bye. Bye-bye. Bye.
All right, bye.
Okay. Hello, everybody. So we are going to, and we don't have too much time left, but we're going to transition into talking about our poverty discussion. This week or this month, everyone was supposed to have listened to the poverty tour. I hope you all did. Before we get started talking about it, I have a couple of quotes that stood out to me, but I just want to know what you guys thought about it, if you liked it, any initial responses that you guys are dying to share, because it was so compelling. Did y'all read it? Can we start there? Okay. I'm gonna mute Stephanie. Stephanie, you're unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Awesome. I just thought it was interesting that they brought in a Buddhist biologist to help with empathy training.
Yeah, I think so. For those of you that don't, I have a background in comparative religion, so religion across different spectrums. But yeah, I found that really interesting as well, and I think that that's a really cool way to have interfaith dialogue in different ways, or different people talking to different people in ways, I guess, that have a unifying theme, right? What did you think about what he said? Or are you just really interested that he's Buddhist?
It was more of an interesting a different religion perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, thanks for sharing. Does anyone else have any other comments before I throw up my quote? Nah, y'all are good.
Nobody, not a thing?
Dang, okay. I'm gonna have to pick a cooler article next time. Do you have control over me? Okay, so I just picked out a couple quotes that I thought were important and meaningful throughout the text. We're gonna kind of just go through them, and honestly, all I want is your kind of honest reflection about what you think this meant in the context of the article and what your feelings are on some of these quotes. So the first one,
quick. Yep. So Mia actually did. So if you don't want to speak, you can raise your hand. Or if you do want to speak, you can raise your hand. But if you don't, we do have a questions box where you can just give opinions. And I think that a lot of people did participate in that last time. So if you don't want to actually talk, or if you're having trouble with your audio, then you can definitely put a question or a comment in the questions box. So Mia actually said that she read it. So they had the podcast, but they also had the transcript that you could follow. And she thought that it was interesting. She said, in her opinion, it did a nice overview of extreme poverty in one area and the invisibility of extreme poverty versus Alice poverty. And she said, on the other hand, it missed the scope completely of Alice poverty, which is what the heart of West Michigan United Way's focus on most. Can you give Mia, can I unmute you and you can tell us about Alice poverty? Hold on, let me unmute you. She said yes. Okay.
Unmute everybody?
No, I'm just going to unmute her. Okay, Mia, can we hear you?
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
hi Mia.
Alice poverty is basically the working poor. It stands for asset limited, income constrained, employed. And so they're full-time workers who are one disaster away from basically losing their house, possibly losing their car, and leading them to lose their job. Anything that could just culminate in snowball effect to make them fall into the range of more extreme poverty.
Perfect, thank you. So we're going to come back to this first one. There's another quote that I picked, and it said that unless you have some reason to take a state road out to a county road and then a township road off the county road and a dirt road off another dirt road, you're not going to see them because that's where they are. And that talks a lot about that visibility issue, right? So I'm really glad that you brought that up, that that's not the experience of all people in poverty, and that's not what poverty necessarily looks like in all communities. So do you guys want to share maybe how your experience of poverty just be, or like what you have seen in your communities that you're surveying, either kind of fits this image of this invisible poverty, or if you're working more, like how does poverty look in your community? And that's for everyone, not just Mia.
Can you take that second quote you just said, Cynthia?
Can you just go to the next page? There's the quote. Especially because we have people stationed all over the state, people are going to experience very different levels of visibility with the community they're working in. So even if you think that your experience in your community looks completely different or completely the same, and that you don't need to weigh in on this conversation, it might be really helpful for your cohort to see different ways that poverty looks in Michigan. So Shelby says, poverty in the community I'm serving looks very different from the poverty in the community where I grew up. Very public in Grand Rapids, people are living on the streets versus rural communities where they aren't as visible, so it doesn't seem like it's a problem.
Oh, that was Marley.
Wait, what? Oh, that was Marley.
Marley and Shelby
Are together? Okay.
Yep.
So Marley says that. else want to share about?
Mia also said that most people don't want to identify as living in poverty because of all the negative connotations, so even those in Alice don't necessarily recognize it. And I think that is also interesting, and I have never, I'm from Detroit, and I am currently working in Lansing and living in Lansing. The poverty, what poverty looks like is very different from where I attended college, which is in Alma, Michigan, and it's very rural. Marley also went there, but you know, the poverty seems like it's almost hidden, but then you see that like there is like heavy drug use in the Alma area, and there's a lot of low-income families that live in the area, and also you look at the type of education that the community members in Alma are receiving, and so it is hidden and it's not as visible as living in Detroit and literally walking down the street and having people, you know, people ask you for money, or you see them on the side of the street, or you see them carrying around their belongings with them because they don't have a home. So it does look very different, and it's very hard to, in rural communities, it's hard to reach the community because I think that in a lot of ways they don't identify as living in poverty. Going back to kind of what Via was saying was these people that are living in poverty, known as Alice poverty, and they don't even identify it because they are working full time, and they do have a roof over their heads, but maybe they have like 10 people living in this home, and because they can't afford to move out or they can't afford to get a different home. I know I'm kind of rambling. I am cutting it out.
Darn it. Alejandro says, I think this speaks to the greater issue of poverty and how society tends to once again blame them. Poverty in my community is very visible, and therefore Detroit is always stereotyped as being a very unsafe environment. I'm also going to share what Laura says right now, too, because she follows it up with a contrast between Midland and Detroit. She says, poverty in Midland is very invisible. The center of the city is very generous and wealthy. However, when you go further out into the county, the poverty is more visible, but people do not go there to see it. Having been from Detroit, going to college, and now living in Midland and spending my spring breaks in New York City volunteering, I've been able to learn and see different forms of poverty. Ashley says poverty is very much a big thing in the Flint community. We were just named the poorest city in America. I've always noticed the struggle that my city has gone through. Well, there are so many. I'm so glad so many of you are participating. We have so many things.
Yeah.
Maddie says the refugees I work with enter poverty as soon as they come to America. We have to work with each family to introduce the idea of government assistance programs. Many of our families are not used to the Americanized poverty. That's a really good point, too, that even while poverty looks different throughout Michigan, what it looks like across the nation and then what it looks like across the globe is so different, and there are always like different underlying reasons and different cultural approaches to poverty. Okay, we're trying to get source and stuff.
Yeah, Robbie, I see you made a comment about Swartz and would like to add his thoughts about the poverty tour, how it relates to the services at his work site.
Robbie, you're unmuted. I don't know if you're with Schwartzen or not, but if you would like to share. Robbie? Okay, I'm going to mute you while we try and figure out how to get your voice heard. Rick is also in Midland,
Sure, I'll
where
try.
Laura is. You guys know. So Rick says his community is new to him, but from what he's seen and heard, poverty has a tendency to be rural. And he's noticed that amid all the beautiful homes, there are pockets of poor neighborhoods. Robbie's trying to get a mic. Stephanie says, in Japan, I studied homelessness in Osaka, and the director of the welfare center took a group of international students around where the homeless lived in the streets. What we didn't see were people living in temporary housing where the working poor paid nightly rates. These people were one workday away from having to find a place to sleep outside or on the floor in the homeless shelter. Homelessness is highly stigmatized in Japan. This image is very different than my hometown where the visibly homeless congregate on one side of town just blocks away from the only homeless shelter. Again, I think that's really important, tying that to Maddie's statement about the refugees and how they have to get them kind of accustomed to this Americanized poverty and what that looks like and what government assistance looks like. So those work really nicely together. And then Chelsea says, I was surprised that the stereotype of the poor are lazy is still accepted by many, and the UP people often have at least 2 jobs, sometimes more. Full-time jobs are hard to find because they have to provide benefits. So it sounds like most of you are working in places where poverty is not as visible, but where poverty is is impacting the working class, which is that Alice poverty that Mia was talking about. The first quote that I had chosen said that poverty is a process, a complex social and financial interaction that strengthens the position of the comfortable. You guys experience that in your communities as well, or in what ways make that differ in the same way that the rural-urban poverty looks differently?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, can you turn up your mic?
You can turn it up.
Is this Robbie?
Yeah.
This is Schwartz. Oh, Schwartzen. Okay.
Can you guys hear me? Am I coming in loud and clear?
We can hear you, it's just a little quiet.
No, this is not coming in. I can hear it from here.
He's with Robbie.
Can you guys hear me now? A little better? Hello?
Robbie or Schwartzen?
Can you guys hear me? Yeah. I'm going to discuss the poverty tour video that I watched yesterday. It talked about how the guy was going to Ohio. He talked about a strong 3 main flavors of poverty. What stuck out to me was in Atlanta, he said the rate of people getting out of poverty is a 4% chance. Meanwhile, in Salt Lake City, it's 11%. And so he wanted to explore. What stood out to me was that the major percentage difference based on demographics and location. So
Schwartzen, we are having a really hard time hearing you, and so are the other people. And I know that it might be hard to type all of everything that you want to say, but if you want to summarize it in a question, we can read it out loud.
I did hear you say too that the part that I did catch is that 4%. There's a 4% chance if you're from Atlanta and you're born in poverty that you can escape poverty, whereas in Salt Lake City, Utah, that's an 11% chance. So if you're born in poverty, you have an 11% chance to escape poverty, and looking at some of the difference in demographics in those locations and seeing some of the bigger questions as to what is causing people to be systemically and generationally impoverished. Is that right? Okay. We have lots and lots and lots. Okay. Did you guys hear what I said? Okay, yes, Robbie said yes. Okay, cool. Yeah, I definitely think that is Schwartzman saying that those numbers are really startling to him to see the comparison between Salt Lake City and Atlanta and how much harder it was to escape poverty just because you were from Atlanta. So I think that's a really important point to look at, again, how poverty and the causes change geographically and how different communities are affected and how poverty looks different in those different communities. I have a couple more quotes that we're definitely not going to get to if we want to end on time, but they will, I'll put them when we email out the webinar. I will, or those will be in the webinar, and you can at least look at something that I was interested in, and if any of you guys want to have a conversation around them at another time, you guys have our contact information. But we're going to move on. I really appreciate all of you guys that participated. I know we didn't talk too much about the podcast in itself, but I do think it's really important that people see different ways that poverty looks in Michigan, and that we're able to kind of share about our experiences in communities to kind of break down this idea that poverty is one thing or looks one way. So I'm okay with not delving into some of those ideas.
Yeah, we have to end on time.
Mm-hmm.
Did you read Richard's comment and then Alejandra's last comment?
So
I can see it. So just real quick, before we go into housekeeping, because I want you to guys to get out on time, Alejandra had one last comment, and I think that it's a great way to end. So this quote has so much power in speaking to the complexity of poverty. If poverty was so easy to resolve, then this problem would have been solved years ago. But making programs, resources, and services that treat it like it's a personal problem and not systemic is the true problem, and not shifting the needle. And I think that, Alejandra, I really appreciate you sharing that with us because it is a systemic issue. It's not a personal problem. And Kat suggested that you guys could continue the discussion on the Facebook group. I'm totally for that if you guys want to continue to discuss this, since we did run out of time.
I will post my post on there as well, and if you guys want to have a conversation under that, you guys are welcome to, or you're welcome to post your own posts and your own questions. So we're going to move on to housekeeping. Well, I do actually want to say this too, because I responded to Rick, but I didn't read this out loud. There's a poverty immersion workshop in October and November in Midland that he's going to be attending. So I'm going to get that information from him, and I will also post that, or if Rick will post that on the Facebook group. And then those of you guys who are in the area might be able to attend as well. Housekeeping. Okay. So I know there's still a few people that I haven't received your September monthly reports and timesheets, or your VISTA leaders haven't received them. So please turn them in, because it is October 4th and they were due 5 days ago. So please turn those in. We need these turned in on time for our reporting purposes in order to further our VISTA program. So it's pertinent that it's turned in on time. Next thing is that your VISTA leaders are going to start scheduling Skype site visits with you and your supervisors. So the idea is that we are just trying to get everyone on the calendar to do a Skype site visit this fall when Maggie comes back. So Maggie should be back early November, and so we're looking to schedule our site visits in early December, maybe late November. So I'm not sure if you guys already sent out an email about it?
I did not.
Okay, so be on the lookout for an email about Skype site visits, and I know that it can be really hard. That's why we're trying to give so much notice, is it can be really hard to coordinate a time where Maggie, the VISTA leaders, your supervisor, and you can all meet. And so just take a look at your calendar, talk to your supervisor, and figure out what day, time works best for you guys. We're thinking about 3 hours for 3 or 4 hours, 4 hours for every site visit. So there would be lunch involved. We want to, get you guys lunch. We're trying to work out how we can do that, maybe through gift cards or not, and then doing a Skype site visit. Next thing, your VISTA Year Initiative proposal forms are due on October 17th. The proposal form can be found at this link, but it is on our website, the Weebly website, and it's in the paperwork section. So it's easy to, it's only one page, I believe. You need to get your supervisor's signature from it, so don't turn it in if it's not signed. And it has to be something that aligns not only with, it has to align with the project that you're working on in your VAD, but also align with your personal passions, and also like a community need that you've identified in the last month or so, 2 months that you've been in service, almost 2 months. The last thing is the Traverse City Regional Training is October 20th. We will be sending out more information regarding this training, and we do have a few people coming to stay overnight, and depending on how far away your drive is, just be able to plan for that. But we're still getting the schedule secured, and we're still finalizing everything. So we're tying up loose ends, and then we'll be sending you more information about it. Is there anything else? Okay, we're going to stay on for a little bit longer, and if you have any other questions, please raise your hand or post the questions in the question box, but you guys are free to go. So thanks so much for attending, and I'm sorry that the poverty discussion got cut off a little bit early. Hi, Kat. So we can send you some examples of past initiatives. I'm not sure if Zakia has on file her past initiative form somewhere. So we'll send it to you. Who's your Mary is? Okay, Mary will get in touch. We'll send you some examples. No problem, Kat. And just a reminder for people that haven't left, Stephanie said that the VISTA Year Initiative form is already printed in the handbook that we received during post-PSO training. So if you are having trouble finding it online or having some internet or network issues, you do have a paper copy in your binder.